Ladies and gentlemen, in this Red Gaming Tech.com video we have final information of the specifications of the PlayStation 4. Now much of this isn't going to break new ground, so if you want an in-depth analysis of the PS4's hardware you can check out previous videos. However, this video is going to confirm the clock speed of the GPU, information on the size of the hard drive, and so on and so forth. So, first thing I think it's pretty obvious by now, but the PS4 is powered by the AMD Jaguar APU, which of course features 8 CPU cores, each capable of handling 1 hardware thread, and of course 18 GCN compute units. Now we know now that these compute units do run indeed at 800 MHz, which of course had been heavily rumoured / considered for some time now. Now, for those keeping track, that's about 1.84 teraflops of computing power. We're not exactly sure how this compares to the Xbox One. Why? Well, we know, of course, that there were 18 compute units in the Xbox One, and that's pretty much been confirmed. But we're not sure on the clock speed, as it turns out. Now, many people assume it's going to be 800 MHz, which was rumoured. But there were also rumours that Microsoft are having issues when it comes to clock speed of the Xbox One, and reports suggest that they may be underclocking it due to heat reasons. So we're not exactly sure. So it's possible that it could be anything from 900 G-flops all the way up to about 1.2 T-flops. So yeah, we'll have to see on that one. Regardless, the PS4 itself is pretty impressive at 1.84. Now, one thing we didn't know before, of course, is the hardware specifications in terms of the hard drive space. Obviously, we knew one was included as default, but we weren't sure on the size, the model, or anything else. As it turns out, it's pretty much exactly the same as the Xbox One hard drive, in other words a 500GB model. There are a couple of distinct differences, however, in the fact that you can actually upgrade it and change it as you would like. So you can even most likely put in an SSD as well to make the silky smooth experience you'd expect. Obviously, however, SSDs are quite a lot more expensive than regular hard drives, and more to the point, are a lot more expensive per gigabyte as well. So obviously you'll have to make some judgments on that one. Regardless, you could by all means put in, say, a 1 TB hard drive. Why did they go with 500? Well, they just basically offer the best value in terms of price per gigabyte. And obviously, since Sony have just put in GDDR5 RAM, which of course we will talk about soon, then, well, you have to make some sacrifices. However, 500GB is not exactly all available to the user. There are certain files, of course, which are required by the OS, and we're not exactly sure how much of the hard drive is finalized to be usable by the user. But even if you say it's 40 gigs, then we're still looking at a decent chunk. Obviously, the Xbox One games are not, the PS4 games are not exactly required to install, but certainly large installations are going to be normal, especially if you're looking at games that you're downloading anyway. There are 2 USB 3.0 ports, which is obviously one less than the Xbox One. However, the reason the Xbox One has an extra port is simply to allow you to connect up to, say, an external hard drive, and obviously USB 3 has a rather fast transfer speed, so USB external hard drives would be reasonable for that anyway. So, is 500GB enough? Well, it's up in the air. Obviously, installation of all your games in the library is not required. Obviously, with the with the PS4, you can take the games on and delete them as necessary, so you don't have to worry so much. But the point being that if you do want a decent amount of games installed, well, it's going to fill up pretty quickly. Now, bear in mind that the Xbox One and PS4 both have 50GB of potential storage on their Blu-ray discs. So just how much of that games are going to end up taking, I certainly wouldn't be surprised if some of the launch titles alone are 8 to, say, 20 gigs in size. Obviously, depending on the size of the world. So I wouldn't be surprised if it's not too long, say a year or 2 years max, that we're going to really want to upgrade our hard drives. You are of course looking at a 6-speed CAV Blu-ray drive, which, as I've just mentioned, is 50 gigs in size. Now CAV, that's C-A-V, means constant angular velocity. This means that the disc spins at a constant speed no matter where the disc is actually reading from, which means that if data is at the outer edge of the drive, it's actually going to be read at a different rate than the inner portion of the disc. It's not really that much of a big thing now compared to what it was, say, the previous generation, because obviously now we've got the mandatory installs for both the Xbox One and PS4. The reason for this is simply because of the size of the textures and so forth. It's not really practical to stream that amount of data. Obviously with the PS4 you do have the stealth install thing where a small amount of the game's files will install, then you can start playing while the rest of it installs. That's a hell of a lot better than the infamous Metal Gear Solid 4 approach, where you remember how you had to wait like 5-10 minutes for each section of the game. It wasn't like it happened often, but it was certainly often enough to where you basically had to go make a cup of coffee or something while you were waiting, and then drink the coffee, make another one, and then, you know, after about your 10th cup of coffee, Snake would finally agree that, yes, okay, I'm finished loading now. So, definitely an improvement all round. So, what about the memory? I did warn you guys that we were going to get back to that. Well, there are a few things that aren't confirmed. One is exactly what the memory is utilized for in terms of where it's saving gameplay footage. The second is how much space is actually used by the OS. Now, Sony originally, from what we understand from rumours and white papers and so forth, Sony were aiming to put about 512 megabytes of memory to use for the operating system. Obviously things have changed, and now they've not got the 4 gigs, they've got the 8. So there are theories and speculation and rumours, of course, that they're actually going to be aiming for double that. So 1 gig, which means that of course you've got 7 gigabytes remaining for, well, games, in other words game utilization. We're not exactly sure how that's going to work though. Gorilla, when I was doing the post-mortem analysis, who of course are producing Killzone Shadowfall, I did note that the game's only taking about 5 gigs of RAM. Now, one theory behind this is that it's reserved for operating system. It could be that it's being used as, say, a RAM disk, which would be for, say, recording 1080p footage. Obviously, the PS4 can do that, and you can record footage for sharing. Another theory, however, is that that's not exactly necessary, because when you're doing stuff like that, it's not like it's extremely memory bandwidth intensive, so it's possible that it could just write directly to the hard disk. The problem with that, of course, is that if it were to do that, it may impact loading times and so forth for the console. On the other hand, you can also look at it that it's taking memory bandwidth for the PS4. Not that much, however. Bear in mind the PS4 is using that GDDR5 RAM. And it's also possible that, well, why the hell would you want to basically abandon 3 gigs of RAM when you could just make it a lot smaller than that? So it's not exactly certain what's going to happen in that regard yet. I wouldn't be surprised, however, if there's a small amount of swap memory, a small RAM disk, just for the purposes of capturing footage. However, just how big it is, it's unknown. Similarly, talking about unknown figures, in the same post-mortem analysis, I've mentioned this in a couple of videos, but it bears repeating since it's a spec. We're not exactly sure when it comes down to CPU cores, how many are available when it comes to for games. So, what exactly does that mean? Well, once again, going back to the Killzone analysis, and bear in mind that things could have changed since then, and Sony haven't really given that much more information. But as it turns out from the Killzone analysis, 2 CPU cores were not being used by the game. You can check out the video or the article on Red Gaming Tech for more information on that. And you can clearly see in the images from their own PDF that they're only using, well, 6 cores basically for the game. Now, there are 2 theories behind that. One is that 2 of the cores are being used by the operating system and that's it. In other words, Sony feel that this is what's required to maintain smooth functionality operating system. Another theory behind this is that Sony weren't actually really 100% sure what was going to be used, and therefore they just said, okay guys, you use 2, or maybe Gorilla only felt that they only needed to use 6 rather than, say, 7, and in actuality 7 cores will be available for games. We'll have to see exactly what happens on that. Now, obviously, if it's the case of only one CPU is reserved for games, for operating system functionality, that's only a good thing for games developers. However, much of the power, of course, is going to be coming from the GCN units, which, of course, can do so much more stuff than produce graphics, including compute, which Gorilla themselves have mentioned that they actually were using that for memory defragmentation, but it can be used for physics, artificial intelligence, and so forth as well. So, let's get the bad news out of the way from this as well, because there is a small amount of bad news. I'm not sure exactly the percentage of people this will affect, but it appears that much like the Xbox One, the major AV outputs on the console are now only digital. I repeat, only digital. So, from what I'm reading of the hardware specifications, that means that you are no longer able to connect up to, with, say, a SCART lead, which means, of course, no SD. So, in other words, if you have a standard CRT SD TV, you're boned. You cannot play the PS4. And similarly, component is also gone. So, I say again, component is gone. So, if you're connecting your TV to your TV via component, which of course some systems do, you're screwed. It will not work. You will be unable to play it. Similarly to all of this, HDMI with HDCP encryption is required, so you're going to need a proper TV. So that means that some folks who are playing with PC monitors, older PC monitors and so forth, are going to be a bit SOL. There is some good news, however, and that's it's got the TOS link, SPDIF, for stereo and surround. So it does actually support legacy surround sound devices and amplifiers as well. So, what are my thoughts on the hardware specifications? Well, I've mostly made these clear. I would like Sony to make some confirmations on CPU and memory allocation. I'm hoping it's not going to be 3 gigs allocated now, just to point this out. But Nintendo themselves obviously have 2 gigs of RAM for the Wii U, but 1 gig is usable via games. Now, Nintendo are supposedly doing some changes to the Wii U's OS, and supposedly they're going to actually increase the allocation of memory for games. Now, we're not exactly sure how much by, but obviously, even if it was, say, 256 megabytes more, it's a decent amount. It's also worth noting that apparently they're going to be doing this via improvements to the libraries, such as graphical libraries, programming libraries, and so forth. In other words, making them more efficient and therefore smaller. I think the major blow here is going to be in terms of the folks with SD TVs in component. I know quite a few people who actually do connect their PlayStation 3s up via component. Now, I know what you're going to say. Most people now don't. That's true. Most people do connect via HDTV, via HDMI, because obviously that's how you play the PS3 via Blu-ray. However, some people just are not interested in that. And so those who just use their PS3 primarily for, well, games, they've had no reason to. So they have, say, for example, their Sky boxes, cable boxes, whatever, plugged in via HDMI, and therefore, well, we'll just have to see exactly how people take this. It's going to be a very interesting time, I think, but I don't think it's exactly that surprising. I am somewhat surprised, I suppose. I'm tentatively surprised that I haven't gone with component. I'm not surprised I've not got SD. Standard definition now is, well, old, and even Microsoft had some problems with the support of SD on the Xbox 360. So, well, I'm not surprised they're somewhat abandoning that now, but I think people are going to be a bit pissed that the component isn't there. Who knows, maybe the final machines will change, but it's very unlikely. Regardless, the PS4 is looking to be a very good system indeed, and I'm sure that many people are going to be very happy with it. So I guess the final thing we have to speak about before we close off the video is the package. In other words, what do you get when you plonk down your wad of cash in your store, and what do you get in the box? Well, to begin with, the PlayStation Eye, and of course all the cameras and all that jazz, was supposedly inclusive. But obviously Sony had to make some sacrifices simply because they wanted to beat the Microsoft pricing. And so what they've basically done is they've said that now the PlayStation Eye camera and so forth is going to be an optional peripheral. So it's basically not going to be in the box unless you choose to buy that package. Now, so what is actually going to be in the package? What's going to be in the box, shall I say? Well, obviously there's going to be the console. I mean, I bet you're surprised at that one. There's going to be, of course, the DualShock controller. Obviously there's only one in there, and obviously that's wireless and everything else. You get one USB cable to charge that controller. Obviously you get the power cable as well. One HDMI, because obviously the standard AV component connections are not available, so they're bundled in one HDMI, unknown quality and length, of course, of cable. And finally you get a mono headset, though the jack on the controller itself is stereo. So in other words, it's a fairly cheapy kind of device. We're not exactly sure on audio quality yet, as I obviously don't have one here to check it out. It's certainly not what I'd call a premium package, but obviously retailers themselves, whatever your local retailer is, obviously in the country you're from, are free to do whatever the hell they want with that package. So in other words, if they want to add in a second controller to try and tempt you into buying it, maybe at a discounted price, or for example adding in the PlayStation Eye and a second controller for say the same price as the Xbox One, no doubt that's going to be a popular deal. And so on and so forth. Why, by golly, they are free to do that until their heart's content. However, the basic box does come with that standard standard HDMI cable, one controller, no PlayStation Eye, and obviously the console itself, power cable, and well, USB charger and a mono headset. So it's not exactly premium, but it will do the job, and it's certainly £80 or $100, depending on what region of the world, of course, you're from, cheaper. So that's quite substantial, and obviously will give Microsoft that leg up over their competition. Anyway, that's just about it for this particular video. Hopefully you've enjoyed it. I will see you soon. Take care, and bye for now.